And I am powerless. Powerless.
Perhaps I can help.
Who are you?
You sent for me, Dr. Van Helsing.
Oh, thank God you've come. Thank God.
Welcome to Monster Fest. All right, you ignorant pigs, put down your crack pipes into your beer bongs. It's time for Angry Tabletop Nerds Night at the Movies. This night's offering from Beyond the Pit is Brides of Dracula, 1960, starring Peter Cushing, Yvonne Monlaur, and David Peel. Directed by Terence Fisher and written by Jimmy Sangster. Let's check it out. So, The Horror of Dracula, of course, as you know, was a huge success in the UK. This was a movie made for less than 100,000 British pounds at the time that had a return of nearly 5 million British pounds. Not to mention it had a great American run. So, naturally, Hammer would love to capitalize on this. But they could not get Christopher Lee to come back. So they write a script, they call it Brides of Dracula, and they're able to get Peter Cushing to come back, and they end up with David Peel, who is rather a good-looking fellow at the time, a very famous actor from the 40s, to come back as our primary antagonist, aka the Baron Meinster, or the vampire in this movie. Now, Lee didn't want to come back because he didn't want to be typecasted in the role of Dracula, which is something that happened to his predecessor, Bela Lugosi, who only played Dracula twice. And in another movie, he played a vampire but was not Dracula. And then you do get the return of Peter Cushing, who, let's face it, Van Helsing was the role he was born to play, much like Sherlock Holmes and the evil Dr. Frankenstein. Peter Cushing is one of those special kind of actors that if you give him Victorian literature and then you let him use the words of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle like in The Hound of the Baskervilles, he's able to deliver those lines as if he's just cracking a whip, and so he comes back as Van Helsing, and you do have a good vehicle as a sequel just with those means, because some of the best sequels ever made are sequels that have nothing to do with the original. They don't progress the same story, they tell a different story. Case in point, Sanjuro, starring Toshida Mifune and Tetsuya Nakadai, had absolutely nothing to do with the movie Yojimbo, which also starred Tetsuya Nakadai and Toshida Mifune. Another good example of this is The Exorcist 3, which is kind of connected to the first Exorcist, but it's really more or less a vehicle for George C. Scott and Brad Dourif. And it tells a completely different story, and, they had to force an exorcist in the end of that movie so that they could at least call it The Exorcist. But giving Peter Cushing his own vehicle as Van Helsing, I think they should have made one more of these movies. One was not enough. He does return to the role of Van Helsing in Dracula, 1974 AD, and in the final Dracula film that Hammer makes, but I just don't think it's enough. He also has appearances in other stories as well. But it wasn't really until 1966 when Christopher Lee returns the second time as Dracula. And that's nearly 7.5 years later from when they made The Horror of Dracula. So they must have paid him a lot of money. Of course, Hammer also known for being the king of cheap. Cheap movie, box office return. As long as we get a return, we're in business and everybody's operating in the black. And they basically settle for David Peel. Now, David Peel had some rather large shoes to fill, and I feel that he wasn't able to fill those shoes. And shortly after this, he would make 1 or 2 more movies, and then he would retire from acting entirely. So our story basically centers around a young French peasant woman named Mariana, who is a future teacher at the Lang School for Girls. This is back in the time when you would teach women how to be wives, because this is also back in the time when women had it easy. They only really had two jobs: turn sperm into babies and bread into sandwiches. It was a simpler time back then, back before the dark time, the times before strong-jawed space marines, which is what we got to deal with now. But basically, she's on this journey, and then the carriage stops in a village, and the driver is paid to leave her in that village. So quite clearly, she is being human trafficked. A little bit later, the Baroness Sangster shows up, and despite the best efforts of the peasant couple that ran the inn to get Maria to stay, she has one glass of wine with the Baroness and decides to go up to her castle, even though they warned her not to go up to the castle. These movies are not that complicated. Never go to the creepy Eurotrash castle, all right? And she's quite clearly being human trafficked, and the Baroness is the one paying for the human trafficking. That's kind of like today, where you got a bunch of Illuminati types that like to meet at Bohemian Grove to dress up like drag queens and scare children or molest children. But getting back on the subject, they have a nice meal and a glass of wine up at this castle, and then she learns of the existence of the Baron, and when it looked like he might jump from the balcony, and then he goes and she basically meets him for the first time, and she's a little bit smitten, but she realizes that he is shackled to the wall with a silver chain. The Baron is able to trick Mariana into getting the key off his mother. He then frees himself, kills his mother, and runs into the night. Now, Mariana might have seen or heard some of this. All she did was hear a scream, and then the Baroness is dead. And then, so terrified from the creepy old hag that lived with the Baroness, she runs out into the forest and basically passes out, where she is found by Van Helsing. Mariana and Van Helsing go back to the village where she was human trafficked, and a young girl had just recently been killed, probably on the same night as the Baroness. And this is where Van Helsing starts his investigation. It was the town's priest that sent for him to come there to basically deal with these superstitious peasants who think that vampires still exist in the countryside, even though the priest is a little bit smarter and knows that they do exist. So Van Helsing begins his investigation, and this investigation brings him all the way back to the castle of the Baroness Sangster, where he learns the fate of the Baroness. And then the son, the Baron, shows up, being a vampire. And what does Peter Cushing do? He pulls out a crucifix with this certain gentlemanly swagger, brandishes it at the vampire, and the vampire is stunned as usual. I mean, these scenes are really good with the way that they use the crucifix as a vehicle to defeat evil. And I don't think that they do that enough in modern vampire films, but you have to believe. And the problem is that we have today is that we're not as religious as we used to be back in the 60s, if you get my drift, So our hero is able to drive the Baron off. He goes back and finishes off the Baroness with a staking, and then the Baron later comes calling at the Lang Academy, and she's all happy to see the dude. He even brings her luggage back and everything. It's like, you might be the guy that might have killed your mom. I don't know. I'm a peasant girl from France that can't put two and two together, but as long as you have a title and some money, I don't care. You know what this is? Shitty writing, but as long as it progresses the story, I guess I have to allow it. All right, but it's 1 point against the movie already, is that she sees him, she's smitten with him, and then she agrees to marry him. Now Gina's the other teacher at the school, and she's a little bit jelly. And then all of a sudden, the Baron shows up and takes that woman too. I notice a pattern with most male vampires in movies. They have a tendency to start a vampire A vampire chick harem. They all do it for some reason. In the new Van Helsing rendition, Dracula had a harem of girls, and you go back to the version in the 30s, he had a harem of girls. He was making his harem bigger. This is all about living out your harem anime fantasies if you're a dude vampire. You find all these decent looking chicks like Yvonne Monlaur and you add them to said harem. So Van Helsing comes back to the girls' academy, and basically he deduces after the death of Gina that the vampire will be back for Mariana as well. And then he comes back just in the nick of time to find Gina the vampire. He uses the crucifix to tell him where the hiding place of the Baron is. And of course he goes and he has another confrontation with the Baron. This time the Baron is able to rebuff our hero and puts the bite of the curse of the vampire upon Van Helsing. He leaves him there with the two vampire women in his harem. And during this time, you can't outfox Peter Cushing in this role. He basically takes a brandishing iron, puts it into the embers, and then burns the wound, and then pours holy water on it. It's a piece of hammer gold, basically. An actual known method of curing one's vampiric curse, I think should also be explored in a modern film these days. You know, they did it in Dracula 2000, where the priest is bitten and then he uses sunlight to purge himself. He stays up, and then the sun purges the wound. The Baron comes back with Mariana, and they have another fight. And the Baron gets a whole face full of holy water, which is pretty good. And then the mill catches fire, and as they escape the mill, the Baron is outside in the courtyard, and with a little bit of quick thinking, Van Helsing jumps up, turns the blades of the windmill to make a crucifix, trapping the Baron in the shadow of the crucifix, thus ending the vampire's life. And they always have creative ways of using holy icons, iconography, or stakings, or new and inventive ways that are the old methods to kill vampires in these Hammer films. But that's the long and the short of it on this movie. Let's get to those Slayer Pit totals. We have 7 dead bodies, 3 Hammer babes. Yvonne Monlaur, of course, is S tier. You know, I can't get enough of her in this role because I don't know if it's her hair and her face are just on point, but I might have to say Yvonne might be a 9 or a 10. You know, women like that just don't fall out of the sky. Crucifix foo, branding iron cauterization, 1 staking, 1 crazy hag lady, 1 known way to cure the vampiric curse with fire and holy water, peasants being superstitious, holy water to a vampire's face, Slayer Pit awards to Peter Cushing in the role of Van Helsing. It's just the role he was born to play. Not to mention Terence Fisher for Best Director for doing things the Hammer way. Angry Tabletop Nerd gives this movie 3 skulls. I say check it out for the month of Halloween. You will not be disappointed. And we'll see you in the next one. As you know, if you want to get in touch with me, YouTube and Rumble have many features you can use to interact with me. If you are watching Rumble, you actually have more content over there on the Rumble version of this video. But if you're watching me on YouTube, you know, sadly, YouTube likes to mess around with you whenever you use copyrighted material. They're like, that's a copyright strike. You can't do that. You showed 8 seconds of a movie. How are they going to eat later on in the UK? Oh, wait a minute. How are they going to eat later on in the UK if you're using their footage and not giving them the 3 cents worth of ad revenue? Oh, no. But If you're watching me over there on Rumble, please leave a like and subscribe, not to mention a comment. That does go a long way on the Rumble algorithm. If you're watching me on YouTube, you could please leave a like and a comment and maybe a share. So we'll be back next week for another movie in our Monster Fest series. But until I see you again, keep painting, keep playing, keep watching Hammer Horror, and we'll see you in the next one.
I'm more of an expert at exposing the moon. Get out of here, let's go! See if you can find the one crater.